Today we're going to talk about a different type of game on the channel. A genre of games that I used to be a huge fan of, but kind of just fell off and haven't played a whole bunch of them for years at this point. But we're going to talk about a classic JRPG. And half of you have already clicked off the video. Look, just give it a chance. This is actually a really good game. It's just been remastered, which is kind of weird because the previous game got a full remake last year. But today we're talking about Legend of Mana. Now, of course, everybody's at least heard of Secret of Mana, the first game in this franchise, and is often credited as being the first action RPG. And if you've played it, it shows. That game had a lot of issues. I know it was very revolutionary at the time, but when I finally played it like 15 years later, it was okay. And I only ever knew of one other game in the franchise until recently. So I was surprised to say the least when I found out there are at least 5 games in this series, and Legend of Mana is number 4. And let me tell you, despite being a PS1 game with 2D graphics, this is basically the prototype Kingdom Hearts. The action RPG combat isn't the best in the world, but it is pretty entertaining, so stick around and you might just be surprised. Before we get into this, do the things the algorithm likes. I know you're all tired of hearing it from every channel, which is why I try to keep it condensed, but it really does help. Check out my Patreon if you want to support me directly. Without further ado, let's revive the Mana Tree. Legend of Mana is not a particularly popular game, and it's kind of easy to see why at first glance. It's a 2D JRPG released in a time when 3D was really taking off. And so while the pixelated graphics are really nice, and the HD remaster actually replaces a lot of the background visuals with a sort of hand-drawn style that also looks really nice, people didn't really want that anymore, you know? Even though they look like absolute ass now, people wanted things like Ocarina of Time, or Metal Gear Solid, or any of these innovative, genre-defining games that push the medium forward. And so, when you play something like Castlevania Symphony of the Night or Xenogears, they almost feel antiquated next to these 3D games, but I still really enjoy them. And Legend of Mana is sort of in a similar situation as Xenogears, as being an underground JRPG in a time where Final Fantasy VII had already released and soared the genre to new heights and brought in almost an entire new audience to JRPGs. And so, Legend of Mana is sort of just left behind in the past, but it's a great game. It really is. I was truly surprised. It feels very experimental in a lot of ways. But first we'll talk about the gameplay, because as an action RPG, that's probably going to appeal to a lot more people that would have otherwise just overlooked this game. And overall, I'd say it's decent. It's not amazing combat by any means. And I truly mean it feels like a proto-Kingdom Hearts, in the sense that it's mostly button mashing, and surprisingly has even less depth than Kingdom Hearts, because there's no items to use in combat, there's no magic outside of using a essentially limit break attack that you just build up by hitting enemies and sticking close to your AI companions. Instead of depth, it has a lot of variety. There's all these different weapon types that have their own movesets. I didn't really experiment that much. I mostly just used the two-handed sword and the spear. But you can use those, you can use axes, flails, gauntlets, one-handed sword and shield. There's all these different gear combos you can do, and you can just test out these different movesets. And the more that you use a weapon, you'll unlock those different limit break moves. On top of that, 2 of the face buttons are dedicated to techniques, of which there's actually 26 different types. And these are pretty simple and only slight variations on the same moves, but there's a surprising amount of them. Essentially, you start out with just blocking and backstepping, and you can swap those out with around 6 other starting moves. The more combats you complete with certain combinations of those moves, you unlock new ones. Just to name a few different ones, you can push enemies, you can roll, you can jump, high jump, double jump, backflip, you can crouch to increase your health regeneration, which health regeneration is the only way to get health back outside of candy drops, which only drop in normal combat. So against bosses, crouching is all you got. And by the end game, you just have these really kind of cool, elaborate moves. There's one simply called Evade, where you teleport away from your current spot and create these mirror images of yourself, which feels very anime. But yeah, honestly, that about sums up the combat. You basically just hit stuff. Combine light attacks with heavy attacks, and that's it. The only thing I really don't like about the combat is that every time you use a special move, it takes like 5 or 6 seconds to charge it up, and there's a very good chance that the enemy will have moved way out of the way by the time that you use it, which makes the techniques that have a large area of effect way more useful than any of the other ones. You can actually play this in co-op, which was a defining feature of the original Secret of Mana. There's only 2-player co-op in this one, and similar to Secret of Mana, you can only do it when you actually have a party member with you, which luckily most of the time you do have somebody with you. And you can also have a third party member, which is either a monster pet or a golem that you create yourself, and that's its own bag of worms we'll get into later. So I think I'll actually briefly tackle the story next, because the story is probably the most unique part of this game, because unlike pretty much every other JRPG, this is not a grand quest to stop the evil overlord or dragon or whatever's trying to destroy the earth. No, this is actually a series of mini episodic quests, most of which form a quest line, but all of these quest lines are unrelated to each other. You essentially just team up with whatever the NPC is trying to solve whatever his or her personal problem is, and you're more of an observer and a fighter than a character. You're a silent protagonist, and your NPC partner really is the one driving their story. And so if you play Dragon Quest IX, which I don't suspect most of you have, but it was on the DS, and it was very similar to this, in which you're traveling the world and solving all these little problems that the people have. And even then, Legend of Mana gets a little bit more experimental with it, as basically you are creating the world map yourself. Sometimes when you complete these quests, you get an artifact, right? And you can place an artifact almost anywhere on the map, and that forms the next location that you go to. And this actually does serve a purpose, because depending on where you place the locations on the map will affect their mana levels. And what mana levels do is it affects enemy difficulty, but also if you max out a mana level, you can find a mana spirit in each level, and you're supposed to play these instruments and you get these mana coins, and it ties into like crafting elements in the game. That's just one of many obscure mechanics that really kind of adds to the complexity. And so it's kind of cool. In a way, it almost feels like you're forging your own story, especially since you can ignore a lot of the side quests in this game, and some of them are missable as well. I can't state this enough. If you are a completionist, you have to play this game with a guide open. Period. Probably multiple guides. There's a quest in this game where you have to actually learn a language of these little bear people, and that shit is fucking obnoxious. You basically have to bring out a pen and paper unless you're gonna cheat with a guide. But also, you can very easily miss quests. I missed an entire quest line of like 5 or more quests early on, just because I didn't explore one room of an inn in the first town. While that was kind of annoying, I don't really mind it too much. My completionist days are over, and I guess it gives you a reason to do another playthrough after you're done. And I guess I should probably just talk about a lot of these obscure, weird mechanics, because there's a lot of them that the game doesn't explain well, because this is a 22-year-old JRPG. One of the major of these mechanics that you're likely going to engage with are the monster eggs and pets, which if you're playing the game normally, you'll probably never find a monster egg outside of the tutorial quest, because monster eggs and mana spirits, which are also pretty important, are both located where you fight bosses during these side quests. Pretty much every quest kicks you out to the world map, so you have to actually re-enter that map, go all the way back to where the boss was, just to get one of these monster eggs. And the monster eggs have random monsters in them, so you might not even get what you want. And then once you've hatched your monster a few days later, which days are calculated by how far you travel on the world map, There's all these weird monster corral mechanics that aren't explained that well either. Like feeding your monster, which how that works is a monster only feeds when it levels up, and the things it eats boost its stats. And so this can become a pain in the ass because it eats everything every time it levels up. So you have to constantly go back to your home if you want to min-max your pet's stats, which you're not going to do. Which your monster's probably not even going to level up that much in the first place, because the only way to get EXP in this game is to pick up the little EXP crystals that drop from monsters. There are a few items that share EXP across the entire party, but if you don't have one of those, you better pray that your monster just accidentally wanders into an EXP crystal. Then there's also Ring Ring Land, which was something most people didn't get to experience in the original game, because you had to have a Sony Pocket Station, basically like a Tamagotchi type of thing. Well, luckily it's integrated directly into the remaster, and it's basically you just take the pet out and play Monopoly and hope that you get lucky and get items. That's it. Then you have the alternative mechanic to pets, which is the golems. I'm going to keep this simple because it's incredibly complex. All three of the major crafting systems are very complex, so much so that there are game facts guides that are the length of a short novel just explaining how these mechanics work. But basically, you make a golem out of equipment, and how good the golem is based on that equipment. Then after you've made the golem, you have to give it basically AI blocks, which you craft out of other equipment. So it was already pretty fucking expensive, and then it skyrockets because you have to create its own AI, otherwise it won't even do anything in battle. And so honestly, I just said fuck it and didn't even bother with that. Plus, I'd rather raise the monster pets, to be honest. But I've heard that the golems way outpace them if you're willing to spend a fortune in items to craft high quality equipment that you then turn into the golem. Which brings me to tempering and forging, which is exactly what it sounds like. You can make weapons and armor based on materials you've found throughout the game. Then you can take said items and improve them further, which is very important if you want to be cutting edge in terms of damage and armor, which honestly this game isn't that difficult, so it's not really that necessary. But you could definitely pour everything into your best weapon, just do insane amounts of damage. Then finally, you can create musical instruments, which for most of you, you'll have no idea what that actually does, unless again you find the tutorial quest for it, which basically, it's what I explained before. If you reach a maximum mana level for an area where the monster egg would normally be, sometimes there's a mana spirit, and you can play the instruments, and if they like the music that you're playing, they'll get close to you and give you elemental coins. Now, elemental coins are very important for crafting because they're basically the best items for said crafting. They can help you make more musical instruments, or more likely, you're going to use them to temper your equipment because they're pretty much the best ways to increase the damage on your weapons. And you can see kinda where the problem with this game is just based on everything I just said there. Where this game is wide as an ocean but deep as a puddle. And that's really how it feels. The combat's super simple. You just hit circle, 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 triangle, you know, for most of your moveset. Sometimes you'll hit X or square to do a technique. And for the most part, your average battle just kind of feels like filler. The boss fights are pretty cool. Some of them have really unique moves, and the fact that you can actually move around the battlefield to dodge them at least makes it feel somewhat engaging. And some of them can be pretty nasty. There's a plant boss in this game that basically has a one-hit kill move. But for the most part, it's just kind of satisfying in the way any other action RPG is satisfying. Your numbers go up, and doing more damage is fun. And some of those super moves are super fucking flashy. But all these other tertiary mechanics around it really don't add anything to the game for me. I'm sure some people love that stuff, otherwise those game facts guides wouldn't exist. But for me, that doesn't really add anything, so I'm just kind of here for the combat, and I'm here to see some interesting stories. And the universe itself is pretty interesting, even if it is kind of like a kitchen sink setting, as they say. It mixes so many different concepts together and doesn't attempt to have any kind of cohesiveness whatsoever. I mean, You've got tons of different animal people. I mean, they basically anthropomorphize dozens of different types of animals. There's penguin people, walrus people, wolf people, rabbit people, centaurs, gem people. And if I didn't know any better, I would say that Steven Universe ripped off this game because the Jumies, as they are called, have very similar concepts to the gems. But yeah, none of this really feels like a living, breathing world, even though you do see recurring characters, and some locations clearly are meant to be connected to other places, even though you don't have to do that. Never once was I sold on this being like an immersive world in any way. But it is kind of just a fun, episodic anime adventure type of thing. Another thing that's kinda obviously good, because it is a JRPG from the 90s, is the soundtrack. The soundtrack's awesome. That's another thing like Kingdom Hearts in this game. The soundtrack was composed by Yoko Shimomura. Yeah, I'm sure I butchered that name. She's known for composing a lot of Square's soundtracks, and I think this one definitely sounds a lot like Kingdom Hearts. Or I guess Kingdom Hearts sounds like this one. So that's probably another part of why I like it so much. It does repeat songs a bit too often. There's not enough location-based songs, and there's probably only 3 boss themes, one of which is used for the vast majority of them. But this remaster specifically gives it a bit more variety because there's also an arranged soundtrack. If you played the original, I'm sure you won't like the new one, but being new to this game, I liked both soundtracks. I do think the original is a bit better. One huge thing that this remaster improved on the original, I'll say, is the ability to turn off enemy encounters. That is so useful for this game because there are many quests that require you to backtrack to certain places, or if you're going for the monster eggs or mana coins and you just want to rush through the place, you can turn off encounters. That is a huge quality of life feature. On the other hand, though, this remaster does feel kind of lazy because I don't know what engine they used. Maybe it's a modified version of the original engine or it's some kind of emulation. But this game has major slowdown issues at certain parts. It's weird. It's really weird and kind of annoying. This game came out in 1999 and they can't get it to run consistently. I mean, really? And yeah, so in conclusion, would I recommend Legend of Mana? Definitely to any classic JRPG fans. If you like Secret of Mana, I'm sure you'll like this. The HD remaster is available on PS4, PC, and Nintendo Switch. You probably have one of those, I imagine. Even if you're a bigger fan of turn-based RPGs, you'll probably still like this anyway, because it pretty much has what people are looking for in a classic RPG anyway. Cool stories and characters, an interesting fantasy universe, decently entertaining gameplay, and honestly just something that feels more experimental than most modern games. Ideally, this is what I would want to see out of any game franchise that feels like it's worn out most of its ideas. If you can't iterate on the same concept over and over again, then just fucking do something experimental. And that's what this game does. Now, I won't say it's my favorite game to do something like this. I definitely think Dragon Quest IX handled that episodic nature better, but this game has a lot more replayability in that you can do a lot of those quests in any order, or you can just completely skip quest lines. And like Kingdom Hearts, you go to a bunch of different worlds and meet the characters there and help them solve the problem. Obviously, none of these are based on any Disney properties, so it sort of loses that appeal. But it is kind of cool to see a game with a very similar structure to Kingdom Hearts. And so yeah, I'd say this was a really solid game. If you like JRPGs, give it a chance. I suppose if you wanted something a bit more modern, you could try the Trials of Mana remake that came out last year. That's actually a full, from the ground up remake in 3D of the original game. I haven't played it myself, so I can't really vouch for it, but I'll probably play it soon after this. And it's kind of sad to say that there hasn't been a real entry in the Mana series in like 13 years. There were a couple of iOS games that definitely don't count. This is another dormant franchise that I guess, which the cynical part of me says that Square is just trying to squeeze what little money the franchise is worth. But who knows, maybe there's a small chance for a revival based on all these remakes and remasters. We've seen sort of a classic RPG renaissance lately, so maybe the Mana series has a chance at revival in the near future. Hey guys, thanks for watching. Thank you to all my patrons. Your support really helps the channel. And there you go, I've done my first JRPG review. Unless some other one comes out that catches my attention, probably the next one will be Xenogears, because I really do want to talk about that game at some point. Not sure what the next video is going to be. Maybe Deus Ex, I don't know. I'm going to check to see if anything interesting is releasing. But in any case, I'll probably work on Deus Ex and Asura's Wrath at about the same time. And yeah, I don't know. That's about it. I'll see you next time, guys.